As accusations and counter-accusations continue to fly around over last weekend's US-led attacks against alleged chemical weapons facilities in Syria, I will be asking how are such investigations conducted and whether or not they can come to a conclusion as to who are behind these alleged attacks, and what are European leaders and businesses feeling about their ties with China. My exclusive interview with the EU's ambassador to China. Welcome to The Point. I'm Shen. Reports of staged sufferings over chemical attacks emerged surrounding the alleged chemical weapons attack earlier this month in Syria's Douma. The United States, UK and France launched precision airstrikes targeting what they believe to be chemical weapons facilities just outside the Syrian capital, Damascus. The strikes occurred the night before an investigation team from the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, or OPCW, was due to visit the alleged attack site. So exactly what happened in Douma? Who has the final say over whether chemical weapons were used and who might have been behind such attacks? Are we ever going to find out? Joining me in the studio is Councillor Shen Jian from the Department of Arms Control of China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Mr. Shen, thank you very much for joining us today.
Glad to be here.
So given the recent strikes by the US-led coalition in Syria, the world was talking about it, but finally the investigators from OPCW are near the site, not there yet, but exactly how important is their work to find out what happened?
It is important. On-site inspection is always very important for any investigation taken by the OPCW, Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. It is a very crucial link to establish facts surrounding the allegations of toxic weapons use or chemical weapons. We welcome the decision by the Director General of the OPCW to send a fact-finding mission team to Douma. We noted that due to security reasons, the team has not arrived on site yet. Recently, the Director General of the OPCW provided an update to the members of the Executive Council of the OPCW, citing security reasons that due to the small arms fires and explosive detonations, the team would not be able to enter the site on schedule. So the team is still in Damascus. We understand that the UN Department for Security and Safety are still negotiating or discussing with the Syrian government and also with the relevant parties in the region to facilitate the early arrival of the team on the site. We hope that the team can be on site as soon as possible, and we look forward to the result of such an investigation.
Right. Help us understand the process here. I mean, first of all, who has the authority, who has the mandate in the entire world to investigate chemical weapons attacks? Because we have heard about this OPCW quite a bit, but this seems that there have been various missions, right? We have the GIM, we have the FEM, and during the previous UN Security Council meeting, we also heard about the team of an independent investigation mechanism. And then there are these other groups that are also seeming to be investigating chemical weapons attacks, such as those attached to the Human Rights Council of the United Nations. So who really are the mandated organization to do this job?
I think the OPCW has the most authoritative role to play in investigating the relevant case.
Is the OPCW the United Nations? Are they the same thing?
The OPCW is the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. It is not under the United Nations, but related to the United Nations. It is an independent body, but it is a professional body. And currently, the FFM, just now we talked about that,
the fact-finding mission by the OPCW
was established by the authority of the Director General of the OPCW and further endorsed by the UN Security Council resolutions as well as Executive Council decisions of the OPCW. And the mandate of the team is to establish facts surrounding the allegations of use of toxic chemicals.
Right, so they have the mandate. Could somebody else also be given the job to find out what happened? I mean, what kind of technical threshold there must be, because we're talking about chemical weapons?
The fact-finding mission has a mandate to establish facts, but it has not the mandate to attribute the responsibility of who used the chemical weapons. Therefore, in 2000...
Why does it not have the mandate? Is it because it is not asked to do so, or it is not possible to do so?
It was not asked to do so under the authority of the Director General of the OPCW. And it can only act in accordance with the mandate adopted by the Executive Council. So its mandate is to establish facts. And the JIM, just now I talked about the JIM. The JIM's mandate is to find
those... Which is a joint investigation mechanism. What does that mean? Who are...
It's joint investigation mechanism, meaning the OPCW and the UN joint mechanism. It has the mandate to find those who use the chemical weapons. But unfortunately, last year the mandate was not renewed, so there is no mechanism follow-up to the FFM to investigate who use the chemical weapons.
What about the other entities that I mentioned? For instance, there was the so-called International Independent Investigation on Syria, which is attached to the Human Rights Council. They also keep coming up with reports and findings, conclusions as to which of the reported chemical weapons so far have been done by the government and which have been done by the the extremists and opposition groups. Are we able to quote their finding in a credible manner?
I would say the most authoritative one will be the OPCW's team, because it's a professional body and it's an independent body dealing with chemical weapons, and any issues related to chemical weapons use, development, stockpiling should be referred to the OPCW or the Convention on the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. Of course, there are other teams. There are various other issues like what you said, human rights issues, humanitarian issues. Therefore, there are other bodies investigating relevant incidents. But as far as chemical weapons is concerned, I would just say the OPCW's team should be the main channel to do the job.
So the way how they do their job, first of all, they have to get the mandate, right, from the UN Security Council, and then they send their investigators on the ground. How do they conduct their work?
For the OPCW, they have this mandate for the FFM. The mandate was endorsed by the Executive Council of the OPCW as well as the UN Security Council. As soon as they heard the alleged reports of allegations of use of chemical weapons, the Director General has the authority to send a team to the ground for on-site inspections and for relevant investigations. And they will collect samples, they will have interviews, and then they will assess those samples they collected and analyze those samples through the OPCW designated laboratories. Then they submit their report to the state parties of the Convention on the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, as well as to the Director General, the Secretary General of the United Nations. So,
what are the challenges, however, to find traces of chemical weapons that might have been used in this dangerous surrounding and everything, in ruins?
Indeed, it's quite a challenge, as we noted from the press release from the Director General. The security environment is not so favorable. There are still war going on, there are still conflicts, so it's a danger to the inspectors. So it is very difficult and challenging for the inspectors to collect samples on the site. This is a special case, but we believe that we count on the professionalism of the team, and we hope that they can accomplish their job.
But how much leeway there is that they might come to a wrong conclusion? Is there any possibility? I mean, what about from whom they get their interviews, or what kind of samples? What are the challenges there?
Indeed, there are certain procedures in the OPCW, and for the inspections, not necessarily just the on-site inspections, but for other inspections as well. The Convention on the Chemical Weapons has already entered in force for 20 years. There are established procedures, and those inspectors are following those procedures. It is very important to ensure the chain of custody. That is to collect samples on site, then ensure the integrity of the evidence before they are sent to the designated laboratories for further analysis. So there are challenges, but I believe that these challenges can be dealt with the professionalism of the inspectors from the OPCW.
So once they have a finding, let's say if chemical weapons was used, what would happen next? Because right now what we've seen is the United States, the UK and France, they already launched their attack before the investigators arrived on the site. Although they say they have evidence, nobody knows. Although they say that they're only doing this to teach President Assad a lesson. What is the problem with all of, with doing things this way?
It's a pity that some countries launch their strikes against Syria before any investigation takes place or before any conclusions has been made. As far as we are concerned, we believe that it is very important to carry out a comprehensive, impartial and objective investigation into the alleged use of chemical weapons, so that we can gather solid evidence and achieve a solid conclusion that can stand the test of time. As far as the investigation is concerned, we believe that there should be no prejudgment before any result is out. And we notice the military attacks. It's a pity that unilateral military actions has taken place, bypassing the UN Security Council.
But some people are saying the UN Security Council is in practical paralyzed, because so many times, I don't remember how many times that there has been vetoed, so no resolution is able to come to a consensus as to what to do with Syria. So in that case, some people are arguing something has to be done, right? How do you look at this kind of argument?
Indeed, there are different views in the Security Council currently, and some actions has not been taken. But it is very important to wait for the results of the investigation and get the endorsement from the UN Security Council before taking any military actions. Otherwise, it runs counter to the UN Charter, and also is contrary to the principles of international law and basic norms governing international relations. And it will only aggravate or make the situation on the ground more complicated.
What is China's position in one step further on this issue?
China's principled position on this issue is always based on facts and the truth, and we are not protecting anyone. We are just following the developments very closely. We hope that an investigation can be carried out as soon as possible in a professional manner, impartial manner, so that we can reach a conclusion that can stand the test of time, and then on that basis we will decide what to do next. But on the matter of chemical use, it's consistent position of China that we are against the use of chemical weapons by anyone, any organization, any country, under any circumstances, for any purposes. And we believe that those perpetrators should be held accountable. But the most important right now is to identify the facts and find those perpetrators, and we will decide what next to do.
Councillor Shen Jian from the Department of Arms Control of the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And you have been watching The Point with me, Liu Xin. We'll take a very short break, and my exclusive interview with the EU ambassador to China coming right up. Stay with us. The European Union on Monday requested consultations with the US at the World Trade Organization over Washington's move to impose tariffs on steel and aluminum imports. On Wednesday, the EU Trade Commissioner Cecilia Malmstrom said that US tariffs imposed on steel and aluminum are distorting global trade and may undermine global economic growth. In response to the same measures, China submitted a consultation request to the United States. States under the WTO dispute settlement mechanism in early April and formally initiated a dispute settlement procedure. Now, China and the EU are important trading partners for one another. Last year, bilateral trade volume exceeded $600 billion as the EU's High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Federica Mogherini, said in an interview, the EU and China share the view of a global order based on multilateralism and on the UN system. Our cooperation has never been so important in a moment when multilateral global governance is put into question from many sides. So what kinds of opportunities and challenges are the two sides faced with in the context of trade protectionism? Earlier, I talked to the ambassador of the European Union to China, Dr. Dietmar Schweisgut. Let's take a look at this interview. Thank you very much for accepting our interview. If I would be asking you to use one adjective to describe the relationship between China and the European Union in 2017, which word would you use and why?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. If I were to look at the relationship between the EU and China last year and also at the beginning of this year, I would say they are very solid. They are solid because we have seen an intensification last year on our cooperation contacts on international political and security questions of importance to both of us, from Iran to Afghanistan to the situation on the Korean Peninsula, the wider Middle East, etc. That is very important because it shows that we take our responsibilities as global actors. Secondly, I think we have a very strong and solid economic relationship. And we just saw from our side the latest trade figures on trade on goods for last year, which showed that we had a very healthy, robust increase in bilateral trade in goods. So that shows a bit also the importance of this relationship with the European Union continuing to be the largest trading partner for China, and China the second largest for Europe. Thirdly, I would say that we have also cooperated very well on issues which I would call global governance issues, climate change among the most important one. But we also cooperated very well in the framework of the G20. And lastly, people-to-people relations, a very important part of our relationship, where we had the high-level people-to-people dialogue in Shanghai in the last quarter of 2017, setting also the tone for an important part of our agenda in 2018, the year of tourism. So I could go on, but I think that shows a bit that we have a very solid and strong relationship.
So solid is the key word. Would you also use that word to describe the comprehensive strategic partnership between China and the EU, which was established in October 2003 and it's entering its 15th year?
I could, but of course that's a slightly different thing because we are talking about a time perspective of 15 years. And over time, this strategic partnership has been evolving. And I would stress that aspect very much. You know, in 2003, China was a different China. It was, I think, at the time, the 7th or 8th largest economy. Now it's the 3rd largest after the United States and the European Union. The European Union was much smaller at the time, had only 15 member states. So our role as global actors, as major economies, has been growing. In 2003, when we started also, trade was not as important as it was now, neither was our political and security cooperation. And I think we took a very important step a couple of years ago when we agreed on the Agenda for Strategic Cooperation 2020, which covers the whole range of issues from international peace to prosperity to global governance and people-to-people. And we are continuing to implement that. We have more than 60 dialogues, you know, covering areas as diverse as food security, aviation, trade, etc. And that means that this strategic partnership now is solid, it's strong. But we also face new challenges. And that is something which we have to address to if you want, rebalance the relationship in a way which makes it more based on reciprocity, also given China's weight in today's world.
Well, one of the things that is helping to bring concrete benefits to the local people is this China-Europe Rail Express, which has been operating for a couple of years, and according to Xinhua, this express made over 100% more trips in the year 2017, reaching 13 European countries and 36 different cities, which is largely welcomed by people in Europe and in the regions along the route. So what kind of supportive policies is EU considering to further increase the kind of benefits that the expressway could deliver to people in Europe and in the region along the way?
No, I think that's obviously a very good development. Everything which can sort of improve transports and facilitate the flow of trade is something which we welcome. I think we have to put it in perspective. You know, trade between the European Union and China is huge, as I said earlier. But of course 90% of trade in goods is done via shipping. Therefore, you know, this is continuing to be, if you want, the major mode of transport to facilitate trade. Mm-hmm. But any diversification is something which is welcome. It can facilitate new opportunities. It will be particularly welcome also in some areas where the connection makes a great deal of sense. Chengdu, for instance, is far away from the sea, so that makes a lot of sense. Also Chongqing and others. Mm-hmm. But we also need to make sure that we can have this as a sustainable development. For the time being, I understand that a lot of this rail transport is still based on subsidies from local governments, and that also raises a bit the question mark, how can we ensure the sustainability, because subsidies cannot go on forever. And of course, as I said before, if you put it in perspective, you need about 100 freight trains to fill the cargo capacity of one ship.
How do you think of the two sides can improve their trust?
The best way to increase trust usually is always to talk to each other as much as openly as is possible. So keeping open and improving and building on the channels of communication we have is highly important. And I'm happy to say that we have a strong institutional framework. You know, we have yearly summits, we have the strategic dialogue, the high-level economic dialogue, we have 60 sectoral dialogues. So this is a solid framework where I think we also sometimes have the possibility of have early warning systems. You know, when things start to become complicated, we have the means to adjust to that. So I think that it will be important that we continue to attach high importance to maintain the schedule of those high-level meetings and have a common ambition also to use them for good purpose. In the case of EU-China very specifically, I think one thing which could make a huge contribution to improve trust would be if you could make progress on our negotiations on a comprehensive investment agreement. That could address a number of worries which we have, a number of concerns, and therefore we would hope that we will see also sort of a more responsive attitude from the Chinese side. But lastly, you know, it comes down to people-to-people relations. I think the more interchange we have, the more Chinese people visit Europe, interact with Europeans, the more Europeans come to see the reality of China, I think the more we can foster understanding.
Mm-hmm. Well, as we said, that China and Europe are very important trade partners with each other. Last year, bilateral trade exceeded $600 billion US dollars. How do you look at the future, overall future of bilateral trade ties?
Well, I think when it comes to trade in goods, as you just mentioned, well beyond 600 billion US dollars, in fact, last year. So we are seeing healthy growth, and which also reflects the fact that the European economy is back. You know, we have seen now a situation for a couple of years in a row where the economy not only recovered, but where the recovery has taken a strong hold in all member states, where employment is going up, confidence is going up. So that is a good sign. You know, you need to have strong economies on both sides also to be confident and to be able to interact. We have seen less dynamism, if I may say, when it comes to trade in services. You know that we still have a huge deficit when it comes to trade in goods. We have a slight surplus when it comes to trade in services, but the volume of our trade in services is still relatively low, and we think it's partly also related to the investment situation. So this is why we think that an investment agreement which would address not only comprehensive investment protection but also cover market access issues would go a very long way in furthering the potential, which should go well beyond trade in goods. And this is where I see the future. I hope, you mentioned that earlier, that the promises we have seen in an accelerated sequence will in 2018 also lead to real opening up, which would also then enable us to make progress on our bilateral agenda. So that would be what we would hope for, and where we see a huge potential.
Well, we will be keeping a close watch on that, definitely. Finally, you mentioned the importance of people-to-people exchanges, and 2018 will be EU-China tourism year. So what kind of programs, what kind of measures are we seeing to facilitate more people-to-people exchanges?
I think that's a very important year. You know, sometimes people play it down a bit, saying that, well, tourism happens anyway. But I think what we want to do really is to have it in a framework which enables people to look at sometimes less well-developed areas of tourism, encourage people on both sides to go to areas which are not Hangzhou or Venice, but also where there are lots of things to do and to see, but which are not yet in the spotlight. Mm-hmm. We also link it on the European side to what we have this year as the year of cultural heritage. So increasingly tourism is going into areas, and I see that very often when I talk to Chinese, going well beyond shopping. There's much more interest now in the culture and the lifestyles. So we link it also to a campaign we have had for a while, Experience Europe. We see also more interest on the European side to develop their links to people, showing them a bit the lifestyle of Chinese. We hope we can also use the year of tourism to exploit business corporations in the tourist sector, and also hopefully it will serve as an incentive to make progress on visa facilitation.
Are we going to see a further relaxation of tourism visa for European countries? Or?
I hope so. I hope so, if we can make progress in our ongoing negotiations, which have two areas. We want to advance on visa facilitation, making it easier for tourists from both sides, including for Chinese tourists to go to Europe. But we also need to make progress on the other part of it. It's jointly also combat illegal migration, which of course is in our interest on both sides.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Schweisgut, the Ambassador of the European Union to China.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to be with you.
That's all for this edition of The Point with me, Li Xin. Follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle The Point with LX. Thank you for watching. You've got The Point, and have a good weekend.